watch people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives.
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Dewbs & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Hello there, happy Friday to you. It's 6 o'clock, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and this is Dewbs & Co. Coming up tonight, the sadistic teenage murderers of Brianna Ghey have today been named and sentenced. What makes children do such evil things? Is it nature or nurture? Do you think it was right that these teenagers have been named? And at the sentencing, there was even talk of rehabilitation. Really? Do you think you can rehabilitate someone who has done something as evil as this? I'm not convinced. Anyway, the guy also accused of the chemical attack in Clapham is still on the run. After 2 failed asylum attempts and a conviction for sexual offences, he claimed asylum by saying he was now a Christian. Well, if he's a Christian, I am the Queen of Sheba. How on earth did our asylum system become such a joke, and a dangerous one at that? And when the Tories removed the cap from bankers' bonuses, the Labour Party said it told us all we need to know about the Tories. Now, though, the Labour Party have said they will not reintroduce that cap. Is that the right decision or not? And get this right, a study has claimed that rugby being played in schools is a form of child abuse. Is it? Well, I'm going to get stuck into all of that and more with Lord Moylan and Paul Embrew. But before we do, let's cross live for tonight's latest news headlines.
Good evening, I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB Newsroom. 2 teenagers who killed Brianna Ghey in what's been described as a sadistic attack have been jailed for her murder. 16-year-old Scarlett Jenkinson, who for the first time admitted stabbing the transgender teen, will serve a minimum term of 22 years. Her accomplice, Eddie Ratcliffe, was given a minimum of 20 years. The court heard after coaxing Brianna to a park, they stabbed her 28 times in a frenzied and ferocious attack with a hunting knife. In victim statements, Brianna's family described her killers as 2 predators stalking their prey and said they are pure evil. Senior Crown Prosecutor Nicola Wynne-Williams says the nature of the crime was particularly shocking.
The sentencing hearing concludes one of the most disturbing cases that the CPS has had to deal with. At just 16, Scarlett Jenkinson and Eddie Ratcliffe are convicted killers, responsible for the brutal murder of a young girl who thought they were friends. The planning, violence and the age of the killers is beyond belief. The two appear to have had a deadly influence on each other and turned what may have started out as dark fantasies about murder into a reality.
A manhunt continues tonight for a suspected chemical attacker, with police saying they found significant and important new evidence. A new image has been released of Abdul Azidi, who was last seen at London's King's Cross Underground station on Wednesday evening. Police say the 31-year-old mother who was attacked is still sedated in hospital with life-changing injuries. It comes after Rishi Sunak says foreign criminals should not be allowed to stay in the UK following the manhunt. Met Police Commander John Saville appealed for public help in tracing the suspect.
If you've seen Azedi or you know where he is, then I urge you please to contact our hotline, which is 0207 175 2784, or of course you can phone Crime Stoppers. If you think you've seen Azedi now, do not approach him. Ring 999 and we will be there urgently. We need the public's help to trace Azedi. It's really important.
A student who ran over and killed her fiancé after she lost her temper following an argument between them has been sentenced to life in prison. Alice Wood will serve a minimum term of 18 years for the murder of Ryan Watson. The 24-year-old was found guilty of killing Ryan, also 24, following a trial at Chester Crown Court last month. He was hit by the Ford Fiesta Alice was driving near their home in Cheshire, which she had claimed was a tragic accident. A man has died after falling from the Tate Modern near the River Thames in London. Police, air ambulance and paramedics attended the scene, but despite the efforts, the man died at the scene. The gallery, which is one of the most visited art museums in the world, will remain closed following the incident. The death is currently being treated as unexpected, but it is not thought to be suspicious. And there are fresh warnings of potential human rights breaches on the BBC Stockholm barge as asylum seekers face what's being described as claustrophobic conditions. The Home Affairs Select Committee says cramped living conditions are contributing to a decline in mental health for some residents. The cost of housing asylum claimants on the barge is £120 per person per night. It comes as the Home Office has asked for an emergency £2.6 billion after spending more than expected on asylum accommodation. Last year, the government spent around £8 million a day for migrant accommodation, with official figures showing more than 50,000 were housed in hotel rooms. And charges against Greta Thunberg have been thrown out of court. The climate campaigner has appeared at Westminster Magistrates Court for a public order offence after protesting in London last year. She was arrested during the demonstration near Mayfair in October as oil executives met for the Energy Intelligence Forum. However, Judge John Law said today that police tried to impose unlawful conditions during the protest. Greta and 4 other activists pleaded not guilty in November to blocking the entrance to the meeting. And the government's offering a £1,000 sign-on bonus for those to join the childcare sector. It's part of a £6.5 million recruitment scheme and comes just 2 months before the first phase of a flagship childcare expansion. It follows the Chancellor's announcement in March last year that eligible families of children as young as 9 months will be able to claim 30 hours of free childcare a week. Children and Families Minister David Johnston told us the government is giving working families the support they need.
When children are between 0 and 5 years old, a huge proportion of their brain development happens, up to 80% of their brain development, and that has a big role on what happens to them as children, young people, and then as adults. And so the biggest reason for people to look at this sector is the huge difference they can make to children at the earliest stage. We've already seen over 102,000 parents claim this new offer, which is really strong demand, and it shows that this is something that people out there really want and that's going to make a huge difference to their family finances.
And for the latest on all those stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now it's back to Michelle.
Thanks for that, Sophia. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company till 7 o'clock tonight. Alongside me, what a treat. Look what I'm sandwiched in between, everyone. The Conservative Life Pair in the House of Lords. and fresh from the hair salon. He's had his hair done just for us, ladies and gents. I speak, of course, of Lord Moylan and trade unionist and writer, Prince Harry lookalike, and milk tray wannabe man. Look at him. You look a little bit like the milk tray man.
You're showing your age now. I remember the milk tray adverts, the guy all dressed in black, yeah.
Is that an age thing?
Yeah, I mean, he hasn't been on TV for about 20 years. This is 1980s.
Oh, let me rephrase. I don't know anything about the milk tray man. Someone once upon a time wrote in and told me that you look like the milk tray man.
Very good-looking lad he was, definitely.
I didn't realise it was an age thing. I take it all back. Anyway, what a lucky lady I am to be sandwiched beneath... beneath? Oh, Mrs. Between.
Not past the watershed yet.
Let's get this show back on track, everyone. It's Friday, can you tell? Anyway, look, you know the drill on this programme. It is not just about us three and our sandwiches. It's very much about you guys at home as well. What's on your mind tonight? GBviews at gbnews.com is how you get a hold of me. Or you can tweet me, X me, whatever we call it these days, at GB News. Andy says, Michelle, is Dewberry Tavern open tonight? If so, can you have a double on me? He says he'll pay for it and everything. He says, I spoke common sense last night. I've got to say, I was quite angry last night. You'll be pleased to know I've calmed down a little bit tonight. There are some serious topics I want to get into with you this evening. You'll be familiar with some of them, I am sure, because today, Brianna Ghey, her killers have now been publicly named and sentenced. Scarlett Jenkinson, she was one of them. She received a minimum 22-year sentence. Eddie Ratcliffe, he was the other one. He got a minimum 20-year sentence. And there is a lot I want to unpick in this story today, ladies and gents, because I want to ask you all at home and on the panel a few different things. Do you think, actually, these two people should have been named? That's the first question. They are teenagers, after all. Do you back that decision? Also, as well, how on earth do young people, kids, become capable of doing something so evil? Are they born that way? Is this something that's nurtured into them, or what? Daniel, your thoughts?
I've long held the view that everybody who appears in court on a criminal or on a criminal charge should be named. We should have a system of open public justice in this country. Even kids.
At what stage?
And they should be named, certainly at the point, that's a question you could have two views on, but certainly at the point at which they're charged and move into that sphere where they're going to be appearing in court. And I think we should know this whole idea of secret justice, secret courts, not giving out names, it's antithetical to our system. And people, they have a right also to vindicate their names. You can be accused of something and be found not guilty of it. And that in itself isn't a matter of shame. That is a matter of you demonstrating that you're not guilty of something, or the court failing, at least the prosecution, failing to demonstrate you're guilty of something. You're also entitled to vindicate your name through publicising.
Yeah, but people will think often there's no smoke without fire. So if you're
people can think that. People can think that, but that isn't what the system is saying. And I think people, this whole idea that we have less and less knowledge about what's happening in the courts, when we've always operated on a system of public, open justice, is a very, very bad one. And we should be moving right away from that. I congratulate the judge on deciding to name these two people. It's very, very possible she might have decided not to allow that.
Where are you on that one, Paul?
I think only in exceptional circumstances. I think if a case like this, where it is of such magnitude and the case was so horrific, I think it probably is in the public interest to say, yes, we should name the individuals involved regardless of their age. But I don't agree with Daniel that that should be, the default position. I think actually that kids, if they go to, if you're up on a shoplifting charge as an 11-year-old, all right, it probably wouldn't happen in reality. We know that. But if you're up for a low-level sort of crime, and you're before the beacon, you're 11, 12, 13, that's the sort of thing that could potentially stay with you for life.
No, it can't, because it'd be a spent conviction.
No, but the knowledge would.
Is the spent conviction.
But the public, no, that's not the point I'm making, Daniel.
You would be allowed to refer.
What I'm talking about is the stigma. I'm talking about the publicity that occurs at the time when you find yourself going for a job in 10, 15, 20 years' time.
Wouldn't be allowed to mention.
And it's still, sure, I accept that, but the point is it's still out there in the big wide world. It's still there on the internet. People still know about it. They can still refer to it. people will know about it within your community. So, look, I broadly agree with you that, by and large, we should absolutely name suspects, people who have been charged in court and people who have been convicted. But I think with kids, it probably should be a different set of rules, and I think only in exceptional circumstances is it justified. And I think this is an exceptional circumstance. I completely support the idea that these two were named by them.
Brianna's dad was originally not in favour of them being named, I don't think. Then he said that he was in favour of them being named. And then he then said today that actually, on reflection, he wishes that they hadn't been named because, especially this girl, I mean, I've got to say that the pair of these teenagers are absolutely wrong, and obviously. But when you look at the teenager, she was absolutely fascinated by the most horrendous, sadistic, serial killers, torture, all this awful kind of stuff. Well, now she has got notoriety. We all know her name now. So there is a small part of me, Daniel, that worries by naming her, because it's not changed anything. She's going to be behind bars now for a number of years. That's all done. But by us now knowing her name, I worry whether or not she's going to become like some kind of figure of adoration to a bunch of weirdos out in society that are into that kind of thing.
Yeah, there might be some element of that. You can't deny that. But the fact is, you either have a system in which people know what's happening in the courts and they can see it happening, or you have one which is effectively secret justice. When you start on that path, you have lots of other opportunities for closing things down, people who are not mentioned. You get in the civil courts, you get super injunctions now, where you don't know who's behind them, who is it who's stopping the newspapers printing this stuff? You don't even know who it is.
True.
All of this, this spread of secrecy through the courts it seems to me, is very, very dangerous for trust in the justice system, and it's bad policy. So you start with kids and you end up with Russian billionaires. What is the where does this stop?
I think the thing is as well, I don't think that this girl did it for notoriety. If you listen to the evidence in the judge's summing up, I think she committed that crime, and it was horrendous. I was listening to it on the radio on the way down, and the details were horrendous. And I think she did it for personal gratification. I think she clearly had a very dark interest in death and killing and torture, and decided to carry that out. There are some people who kill for notoriety. Probably the most famous example, Mark Chapman, who assassinated John Lennon. But actually, I don't think that was the case here. I don't think she probably cares whether or not she gets notoriety. I think she did it for other reasons. I think the evidence suggests she did it for other reasons.
And what about this whole kind of situation now whereby, it almost becomes something to feast upon. So these kind of cases, I remember it with Lucy Letby as well. You've got newspapers and stuff going, download our podcasts. We're going to explore all the twists and all the turns. And it's kind of like you're almost kind of glamorising this thing as though it's like a fiction-based crime series.
There's nothing new in that. The newspapers of the 19th century, going back 150 years, were much more lurid about murder cases than you would be allowed to have on a podcast today. They were absolutely, not the top-line broadsheets, but the newspapers, were absolutely fascinated by this sort of thing. Of course, they could report stuff from court. There were no secrets. And they feasted on it then. People get over it.
What about this nature versus nurture situation? Because I do confess that when I heard about these two teenagers, one of my first questions internally, I was like, right, well, what's gone on in their life, in their family, that's made them this way? But actually, by all accounts, both of these teenagers, they've got, decent upbringings, loving families, apparently, relatively middle-class upbringings. They seem to be quite, dare I say, normal in their upbringing. So what? It's
so complicated, isn't it? And I think you'd need to be a psychiatrist to get to the bottom of it. I think some people probably are born evil. I think that's probably true. A very small number of people are innately evil, and I think there's probably not much society or medical professionals can do to alter that. I think some people probably become evil, maybe because of their background, maybe because of experiences in their own life. Maybe they've suffered a particular trauma.
Or they get radicalised.
Oh, they're radicalised. Yeah, that's a good example. People can become evil from not being evil. And I think it's true that society will always have sadists. Society will always have people who seek to harm others and carry out the most heinous crimes for reasons of personal gratification. I don't know if that will ever change.
What about you, nature, nurture?
Well, I mean, you have to be a theologian as much as a psychiatrist. The fact is we're all born with a capacity for wrongdoing and for evil. And we we certainly have that capacity and that potentiality, yes. And
I agree with that.
And
do you?
Yeah, I do.
What prevents us from doing that is the fact that we're also born, unlike the animal kingdom, we're born with intellect and will, and they need to be shaped by some sort of moral framework.
I think war
guides us away from indulging, you know, going down the street and punching people we don't like.
I think war is a good example of that. I think when you throw mainly young men into a brutal war, into the front line, into combat with somebody who you present as an enemy, then what people become capable of in those circumstances, especially if they've been fighting a war for a year or 2 years or something in really difficult conditions, they suddenly find that they can, and we see it. We see, you know, people commit war crimes who are otherwise on Civvy Street decent and reasonable people, and that's an example, I think, of where actually you can.
But the other point is that the second part of that is that we can be restrained from doing that through having a proper moral education, which teaches us not to do things that are bad to other people. And a lot of what parents do, of course, goes into that. A lot of what schools do goes into that, into the moral and behavioural education of children. And that's really crucially important. But there are cases where it doesn't work.
See, I'm not a psychiatrist, I do grant you that, but I just completely disagree with both of you. I don't think that as default, every individual, human being has it within them to be evil. I think this whole notion of, you know, stabbing people repeatedly in the head, I don't think...
No, you go back to the gas chambers, you go back to Hannah Arendt and the banality of evil. Evil ceases to be horrendous to the people who are practicing it. It becomes a norm. It becomes banal, and that's how it's
justify it to
through the moral net, if you like.
What do you think? What do you think to it at home? David's been in touch. You've told me an interesting story. He says he watched when his 2.5-year-old grandson encouraged their dog into the lounge and closed the door. David said he was concerned about what was going on, peeped inside. The 2.5-year-old had hold of the dog and was stabbing him with a biro. He says he flagged it to his daughter, obviously the kid's mum. And the kid's mum said, oh, it's just terrible too, and didn't think there was anything wrong with that. He says, anyway, fast forward to the here and now. He's just been sentenced for a knife crime at the age of 20 after being on tag for a couple of years. He's got no job, no prospects. He says, I despair. See, I do think...
What happened to the dog?
Yeah, there you go, David. What happened to the dog? What happened to the dog? I don't know. David doesn't tell me the end of that story. But I do find that quite interesting because I would say it's not quite normal for 2.5-year-olds to be stabbing dogs with biros. And like you, David, I think I would have been a little bit alert to something and concerned. Anyway, we do need the end of that story. What happened to the dog? After the break, I'm also wanting to talk to you about the guy that's on the run, still suspected of being this chemical attacker. I want to know, why on earth was he allowed to even be in this country in the first place after being convicted of sexual offences? Oh yeah, I know, because apparently he's a Christian. Really? I mean, come on now. I'll see you in 2.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's Live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's Live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Newsrate.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry. This is Dewbs & Co. right through till 7. The Tory live peer in the House of Lords, Daniel Moylan. Alongside me, as is the trade unionist and the writer Paul Embry. Nina has just been in touch and said, as a family who were victims of a horrendous crime, she says, to this day, I will be forever grateful that the thing, that's what she calls him, who perpetrated the crime against us was not named, as we would have been forever damaged had his name ever become public knowledge. You see, I think that is an interesting point. How much should the victims have a say in whether or not those perpetrators are named? Do you think the victims should have a say in that?
I think the views of victims should be listened to, and survivors, but should be listened to. But I think there are public policy issues here, because this is bigger than any particular crime, individual crime, or any particular set of victims or family members.
Yeah, lots of people, it won't surprise you, to say that actually things like the death penalty should come into conversation when it comes to crimes like the horrendous murder of Brianna Ghey. Lots
there
of people
absolutely
say...
no way that we would execute somebody under the age of at the age of 16, even if we had the death penalty.
No.
Even when we had it. So this is wholly irrelevant to this.
Yeah, neither should we execute 16-year-olds.
What about when they turned 18?
No, because you'd then be levying a particular punishment for a crime that they didn't commit at 18 and weren't of the adult age to be executed. If in that hypothetical scenario, you'd be punishing them for something they did when they were still a child.
See, I don't really get that. If you're in favour of the death penalty from the age of 18, I don't really understand why, if someone is 17 and a half, so there's a few extra weeks would make all the difference in your mind.
Well, there has to be a cut-off, doesn't there? It's like saying, at what age does somebody become criminally responsible? There are always...
There's always any cut-off.
There's always a cut-off point, and just before...
It will be an arbitrary number.
Just before it's, people will go, yeah, but hold on, we're only a few weeks away from it.
Well,
there's no way around that, I don't
You can have the final say on that. Anyway, I've got some good news. He was asking about the dog.
Oh, yes.
The dog in the Barrow attack by 2.5-year-old David says the dog lived a full and happy life with no apparent lasting effects.
I'm very, very pleased to hear that.
The dog was too loving even to hold a grudge.
Yeah, there you are.
Well, there you go. We do like a happy ending, I've got to say, especially when there is not much to be positive about in the news agenda, got to be honest. Not least the story followed on from yesterday, that Abdul Azidi fella. He is the one, of course, accused of that horrendous chemical attack. It wasn't just a chemical attack, I have to say. He also went on to hit the woman, the mum of the children, with a car. I do have to say that 31-year-old victim, she is still in hospital. She is sedated, and it's now been confirmed that she has life-changing injuries. I mean, this is the perpetrator, or this alleged perpetrator that is on our screens. He is still at large. This is who the police are searching for. I have to tell you some details about this fella. He came over to the UK on a lorry in 2016. He had not one but 2 asylum claims turned down. He then was convicted on a couple of sex offences. And then, apparently, because he get this, everybody, he converted to Christianity. He became a Christian. Some priest then vouched for him, and then he had his asylum granted. I mean, I've got to say, Daniel, right, I think this just makes a mockery of our asylum system. I think there are so many people now that know how to play this system. And, you know, you could have converted to whatever you wanted in your own mind, quite frankly, but even the very fact that you've just been convicted of a crime that on its own should have been merit to be out and deported.
Well, I rather agree. And the fact is that we now allow about 68%, I think it is, of asylum claims that are made.
Yeah.
Whereas 20 years ago, we would have been allowing under 20% of asylum claims, and the rest would have been rejected. Is that because of laziness? Is that because we're desperately trying to clear backlogs, which should never be a driver of public policy on this, whatever the Labour Party says? Or is it because the system has been developed through legal extensions to a point where it's almost impossible to say no? The fact is, many Muslim asylum seekers know that back in their own country, not in every Muslim country, but in many Muslim countries, apostasy to another religion, like Christianity, is an extremely serious offence, and in some countries it would get you stoned to death pretty quickly. So you can say, well, I'm a Christian now. You have too many pastors, I don't know which particular branch or denomination of Christianity this person was converted to, but too many pastors who are willing to accept these things at face value. And it is, and this is clear, there ought to be some better institutional structures for it, because it is fundamentally a safeguarding issue. If you just accept anybody who says they want to be a Christian, even though, you know, just because that's your attitude, then it releases danger on the street. So that's what happened. But then you go back a bit further and you say, well, after he was convicted of the sex offence, should he have been deported at that point? And the answer is, I'd have thought, pretty obviously, yes. But he wasn't. Why not? We don't know the circumstances. At the moment, of course, we don't know that he's committed any offence. I just want to say that. He is being looked for by the police, but we don't know that he's actually done anything wrong. That has to be proven yet.
Well, the suspect should never have been in the country, but the surprise, Michelle, is that anyone is actually surprised by this. Why are people surprised by this? Our asylum system has been a shambles.
Surprised?
Well, I think, you know, there's a lot of outcry. How did this happen? Why did this happen? What a shock.
I don't think people are surprised. I think the second that the Met Police didn't tell us the description of that person yesterday, I think almost immediately people then knew, they joined dots, and then they know, OK, there's a reason why you're asking the public to look out for content and doorbell footage, but you're not telling us what it is that we're looking out for other than a guy.
And let's not forget, a similar thing happened, when was it, 2 or 3 years ago, at Liverpool Women's Hospital, where someone, very similar scenario, was refused asylum from the Middle East, I think Syria it may have been, converted, in inverted commas, to Christianity. The church waved it through, said, yes, this man's a committed Christian. A few weeks before he carried out the attack, reconverted back to Islam. And he should never have been in the country. And everybody said at the time, You know, we need to learn lessons. We need to make sure this doesn't happen again. The same thing that they say every single time, whether it's the Manchester bombing or whatever, we need to look at how we can stop this thing happening. We need to look at how we can tighten up our immigration and asylum laws. You know, people are getting through who clearly shouldn't be here. They're having their asylum claims approved when they shouldn't. And nobody does anything about it. Year after year after year, politicians, and I have to say, Daniel, your party has got to take responsibility for this, certainly over the last 13 years or whatever it is, promising time and time again, we understand the public concern on this, we understand that people want us to address this, yes, we will address it, but year after year after year, not only do they not address it, but actually the problem gets worse, and we hear more of these types of stories about people having asylum claims approved when they shouldn't have, and we see the numbers go up time and time again.
So what's your response to that then, Daniel? Because a lot of people...
What I think has happened, of course the Conservative Party has formed the government since 2015 and was in coalition since 2010, so of course it has a share of responsibility for anything that goes wrong in government during that period. Absolutely, got to say that. But at the same time, if you look at the underlying cause of it, it is fundamentally the legalisation of, if you like, the making all of this subject to constant judicial review and the extension of law by judges in particular cases. And if the government can have a bill which says that Rwanda is safe, and make that a legal, something that the courts have to accept as a legal fact, and they can, if they can get this Act of Parliament, this bill through, then they could equally do something which limited the grounds on which people can appeal and the basis on which appeals can be granted in the courts. And that's the course of action they need to take, but they've been frightened out of it constantly by the whole woke left-wing establishment.
Well, it seems to me like that it's some kind of racket, because if it's not sitting there saying, well, I've converted to Christianity, if that card fails, well, the one you pull out next surely is, oh, well, I'm gay. I'm gay now, so I can't be sent back. And the problem that you've got is how do you prove or disprove either of those two scenarios? What is the answer to that? Meanwhile, by the way, everyone's outraged about this particular case. Meanwhile, up pops James Cleverly. I mean, I'm not laughing because I think this is funny. I'm laughing because the absolute absurdity of it, ladies and gents. He's now popped up asking for an extra £2.6 billion to help with hotel costs, etc., for putting these people up in hotels.
Well, do you want them sleeping on the streets?
Well, what
I mean, the fact that James Cleverly is a sensible, intelligent man I've known a very long time, and I think he realises a lot of this is very unsustainable. We need to see action from James, but James is the sort of Home Secretary who might just deliver on some action. But in the meantime, yes, the whole thing is costing us a fortune. We still need a way of stopping the boats, which is really where these costs are coming from, stopping the boats.
But I'm astonished that your first answer to that is when I raise a concern that I'm telling you now, you'll know anyway, it's a huge concern for people, the amount of money that we're spending, putting these people up in hotels. Your first response to that is, well, what do you want them to do, sleep on the streets?
Well,
I find that quite an interesting response, because most people will be screaming at their screens saying, well, quite frankly, I don't care where they sleep, but it shouldn't be in the likes of 4-star hotels. It's an insult to every single taxpayer in this country.
They're being moved out of 4-star hotels. But the fact is, I'd be more frightened if you had doorways filled with people. I mean, that's what I meant by that. Not, I'm sorry for them to have to sleep on the streets,
let's be
but rather, I'm sorry for the people who would have to live in that environment. But you do have to treat people humanely. You know, whether or not the people should be here, whether or not they've come illegally, you know, we are a civilised country, and if there are people here and we have the capacity to be able to put them in hotels or wherever it is in order to give them, you know, decent, warm, sanitary accommodation, then we should do so. We can have the separate debate. We can have the separate debate, Michelle, about whether they should be here, and we can have the separate debate about the collapse of the asylum system and how some of them are gaming the system, absolutely. But what we can't do is treat them inhumanely and say, actually, go and sleep in the woods or go and...
What about creating, building some form of refugee accommodation? People managed to knock up the Nightingale facilities, not overnight, but not far off. What about knocking up some kind of safe, clean refugee accommodation?
Fine, as long as it's warm and as long as it's safe. I think we have a duty to make sure that people are warm and safe, and then we have the separate debate about it. But there's a distraction. The whole costing is a distraction. You know, we need to deal with the asylum system, but if we get sidetracked into a debate about the money involved, I think we're losing sight of the big point, frankly.
Pretty big distraction, I would say. £8 million a day, an extra £2.6 billion requested. I'd love to know the answer to that, rather than sitting there and saying, well, what do you want them to do, sleep on the streets? Of course not, so give us your cash for more hotels. Why isn't there a conversation being had within government, within the public domain, about building safe, decent, warm refugee accommodation in the way that, for example, the Nightingale hospitals were knocked up very quickly? What about that? Is that the solution to this? You get in touch and give me your thoughts on that. I'm sure you'll have something to say. After the break, I want to talk to you about bankers. Do you think there should be a cap on what they could earn? Do you remember Labour attacked Tory for moving said cap? Well, anyway, they say they're not going to be putting that cap back on. Is that the right decision? See you in 2.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel. Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Wake up to the headlines with headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm with you till 7 o'clock tonight. Lots of conversation about what you would actually do in terms of the accommodation for these asylum seekers. I ask, of course, because James Cleverly's asked for billions more pounds to help with hotel bills for these people, which I think, I've got to say, I think is pretty damn scandalous, really. Not least because in this country, you've got people, British citizens, living in shipping containers. Do you remember that story? Not that long ago? Pretty disgraceful. Anyway, Anne says there needs to be temporary shelters built. It's about time the government started to provide these kinds of facilities. One of my other viewers says you could put up marquees right outside Downing Street and house people see how much our leaders like it. Well, actually, you could put the marquees at the end of the streets of everyone that thinks that refugees are welcome and absolutely supports open borders. Maybe that would be a win-win situation for everybody. But for now, let's talk, shall we, about bankers' bonuses. Lord Moylan keeps me company still, as does Paul Embry. We remember this row, I am sure, about whether or not the cap on bankers' bonuses should have been removed at the time. Labour were very critical about it. Said, for example, it tells us all we need to know about the Tory government, etc. But I've got to say, Rachel Reeves is saying that if they win the next election, she wouldn't reinstate that bankers' bonus cap. What do you make to this, Daniel?
Well, I think she's worked out that actually the government's going to take 40 to 45% of all those bonuses, and that would be rather welcome in the Treasury. I don't think the government should be setting maximum, minimum earnings might be one thing, but setting maximum earnings in the private sector. Now, it's true that some of these banks are not entirely in the private sector, and the government has a say as owner, and that's fair dues. If you own the bank, you're entitled to a say in how it's run. I fully accept that. But in the private sector, the government shouldn't be setting what the wages and the income are.
Do you agree with that, Paul?
No, it's completely wrong. Removing it will just simply encourage that greed is good culture.
Well, it has been removed. It's about whether or not they're going to...
No, exactly, yeah. And I think the removal of it will encourage the greed is good culture. And at a time during the cost of living crisis, when the rest of the country is being told to tighten its belts, when the public sector is being told you can't have a decent pay increase, when people are struggling to make ends meet, when ordinary workers are suffering the tightest grip on wages since Napoleonic times, how can it be right that the government says to bankers, bearing in mind that these are the very people who crashed the economy in 2008 and have put us, they certainly played their part, Daniel, and have put us in the kind of predicament that we've been in for the last 16 years. Actually, we'll let everything let rip again in the city, and we'll let people earn as much as they like. It will encourage recklessness. That's a key thing. One of the reasons...
Has it? It was since it was lifted. Have we seen signs? Remember, what we're discussing here is not lifting.
Let's see.
What we're discussing is Labour's policy on not reinstating.
I think it's too early to say whether or not it's going to encourage recklessness, but I certainly think there is that danger where people think, you know, if they can earn massive bonuses by taking a few more risks, then they will do it. And some of these bonuses, you can get 2 times your salary as a banker. The cap was for 2 times the salary. Even then, that was still, for some of the top executives, still £500,000 in bonuses. I don't think that's particularly unreasonable, Daniel. And as I say, at a time where people in the real economy, the productive sector, and people in the
finance and the real economy.
Well,
as well,
no, it's not really, is it?
Yeah,
it's not the productive sector.
It's
people by and large kind of playing casinos and selling stocks and shares and gambling in the city.
Don't speak over each other. Secondly, let me just bring some facts in. The financial and professional services industry employs 2.5 million people across the UK. That's 1.1 million in financial services, 1.3 million in related professional services. The industry produced £278 billion of economic output, which is 12% of the entire UK's economic output, and £100 billion in tax revenue. So it is a real sector.
Yeah, but it's not what we would understand the real economy to be, which is the productive sector where goods are produced and wealth is produced and you know where
but we have a service-based economy now, don't we?
Well, this is the problem. We are so obsessed with financial services, and I think that obsession with financial services has been massively to the detriment of our industrial base. Manufacturing in this country has been decimated. We don't make anything anymore. Some of our towns in the north and the Midlands, now post-industrial towns, which once upon a time thrived on manufacturing. But because we've essentially recalibrated our economy into financial services and away from that, I think we've paid a huge price as a society for it.
All right, we haven't sent industrial jobs into the City of London. They have gone to China. They have gone to places like that.
But come on,
there's a totally separate...
The economic policy is geared towards...
at providing services, certain types of services, not just finance, accountancy, all sorts of other things are in there. We're good at doing it, and we'll do it for the world. and we make money out of it.
Who does it benefit? It doesn't benefit most people in this country.
Well, as I've
it
just
pays
said,
a lot of their taxes.
It
as much
brings
as
in
you spend on the NHS.
£100 billion in tax revenue. That's some stats that came out in terms of that economic contribution. But where do you stand on that debate? Coming up after the break, the bar is open. Yes, thank God, I've been waiting for that since 6 o'clock, quite frankly. Anyway, I want to ask you, I'll bring in some of your comments on those previous topics, but I also want to ask you as well, rugby. If kids are playing rugby at school, do you think that is a form of child abuse? Should it be banned? Your thoughts, see you in 2.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, Michelle Dewberry with you till 7 o'clock tonight. Lord Moylan remains alongside me, as does Paul Embry. Dewberry Tavern is open. Cheers, everyone.
Cheers.
My weekend officially starts.
Cheers, Michelle.
Here. Cheers. Eddie has been in touch saying... myself and Debbie, so Eddie and Debbie, quite like that, they're watching the programme, they're feeling frustrated with lots of stuff at the moment. They're saying, please, can you stop this world? I want to get off. I would stop it if I couldn't. I'd join you in getting off as well. Unfortunately, it's beyond my powers. Paul says, I normally write off Paul Embry as a work liberal. However, he says, I've got to say, some of his comments this evening have got merit.
A woke liberal, me? Is he getting the right
Paul says.
He is confusing me with Prince Harry, clearly.
Well, Pippa says, I never confuse Paul with Prince Harry. He looks more like Van Gogh to me. Well, there you go. Let's talk rugby, shall we? Because apparently playing rugby in schools is a form of child abuse. This is according to some sports experts. Apparently, these high-impact sports should be considered abusive to children's brains. A couple of viewers on this before I bring the panel in, because lots of you have been getting in touch. Trish says, I felt for a long time that rugby should be banned for children. The potential injuries are so serious and the effects on developing brains could be catastrophic. And for these reasons, she agrees that it should be regarded as child abuse. But Les says, I've never heard anything so silly in all my life as trying to ban rugby for kids. It's the best sport to instill discipline and team spirit in youngsters. Where are you on it, Lord Moylan?
I've never played rugby, and indeed most of my life skills were developed when I was at school, finding new and inventive ways of getting out of games. Which I did with very considerable success.
I had you down as a scrum half, Daniel. I'm shocked.
This led to me becoming quite good mates with the head of games, and I stayed in touch with him later in life. And he was a former professional footballer and a serious sportsman. He's dead now. And he told me later in life, he said that when his son had gone to secondary school, he had gone to the head of games at that secondary school and had said, you can play any sport. I want to be a great sportsman. I want to be a great sportsman, but I do not want my boy playing rugby. And that's because he knew, as someone deeply into it, the risks and the dangers that could arise from playing rugby. And that stayed with me. That was somebody who was not anti-sport, a madly pro-sport, and a professional sportsman in his past.
Paul?
I loved PE at school, and I just fear that we're into a little bit of a culture of safetyism around some of this stuff, where we want to eradicate any risk for children. And, you know, we often hear health and safety gone mad. I don't want to caricature it by that, but in that way, but I do think there's a danger that we can fall into that trap of saying, because there is some risk involved, actually we're going to ignore all of the benefits. And the benefits of kids taking part in sport, I think, are immeasurable. And I say that as someone who was constantly playing sport as a kid, not just in terms of the physical exercise and the mental well-being that it helps you to develop, but the social side of it as well, the feeling of reward when you've put in a good performance. And I just see this potentially as a bit of a slippery slope, because the argument then could be, well, you know, football, do we stop kids from playing football because injuries occur in football and they have to head the ball and so on? And cricket is played with a very hard ball, and some kids go skiing. And I do think, you know, where there is particular evidence, then the game may have to adapt to accommodate what's changed. But only as a last resort.
Well, apparently,
it's a great thing playing sport for kids.
Apparently, more than 4,000 under-18s were referred for medical intervention for suspected concussion suffered on the playing field in the last 12 months. 73% of those, so the vast majority, I've got to say, were for playing rugby. Now, you guys, this has really got...
Well, you're from Hull. You must know how important rugby is to the local community.
I'm not really a rugby person. I'm more Hull City. I've got to say, rugby, you've got Hull Kingston Rovers and Hull FC, so it is a big thing. But no, we were more of a football family. Ian says rugby is the closest you can get to being in the military without actually being in the military. It teaches you so much. He says if rugby is child abuse, then surely what about cadets and scouts, etc., being the same? Brian says, I took my two lads to the local rugby club and it taught them respect and manners, i.e. if they showed any disrespect to the ref decisions, then the team were punished. More meters, he says, to the opposite team. John says, how dare people say that rugby is child abuse? What about all the kids being allowed to be sitting on their phones and gaming machines? He says, surely that is worse. Richard says, of course, forcing children to play rugby is child abuse, and playing it as an adult is the worst form of masochistic self-abuse, he says. I don't know if this is about forcing kids to be playing rugby. I think it's more about what people are saying. So in this report, it says that no concussive hit to the head is benign. It talks about the potential impact in life later on, including early onset dementia, Parkinson's, and problems with memory. Oh, God. I was hoping that last segment in Dewberry Tavern, I was thinking, how can I get some nice upbeat stuff? I know, talk about sports. Within 20 seconds, it's deteriorated into talking about serious illness. Oh, I'll do better next week. Paul, thank you very much for your company. Lord Moylan, thank you for yours.
Thank you, Michelle.
And you know the drill. Thank you very much for your company on TV, online, radio, wherever you are. Thank you for your company. Have a good weekend. I'll see you Monday. Night.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
I'm Alex Deakin, and this is your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. Good evening. Tomorrow will stay pretty mild across the south, a blustery day again across parts of the north, with a mixture of sunshine and showers. We've got high pressure to the south, low pressure to the north, and in between this weather front is just edging southwards. The isobars squeezing together. It's been very gusty over northeast England, southeast Scotland, staying that way into this evening, but slowly overnight the winds will ease at least a little bit. Staying breezy though, particularly in the far north with more showers in here. Some patchy rain for Wales and northern England, but many areas staying dry. And look at the temperatures, 9 or 10 degrees in most towns and cities, certainly through England and Wales. So a pretty mild start to the weekend for early February. On to the details for tomorrow, and cloudy with some rain into Wales, particularly on the west coast. Some of that rain will trickle into northern England, the Midlands and maybe East Anglia later. To the south, most places just dry and cloudy. And further north, a bright day for much of Northern Ireland, southern and eastern Scotland, but blustery again with showers across the Highlands and the Western Isles. A cooler feel here, but again, for most places, pretty mild. On Sunday, we'll see a bit more rain tracking back across Northern Ireland, perhaps into parts of western Scotland and across northern England. Again, much of the south, bar a bit of drizzle over the hills, just dry and fairly drab. Getting quite windy in places once more on Sunday, and again, it's going to be mild, double digits across the board with teens in the south.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate